Welcome back to For the Record, everyone. I'm your host, political analyst Justin Allen Rose, and it's been a while. It's been, I think, almost exactly a month since the last podcast that I released on For the Record. And a lot of things has happened in this political world, both statewide and also nationally. And the reason why I've been away a little bit, one, we had the holidays, of course, Christmas, New Year's, but also, we have some exciting things taking place within KSWO, within 7 News, especially regarding our podcast. We have a lot more podcasts we want to deliver to all of you, not just For the Record, but even more expanded different podcasts to bring you more local news, especially in a very less newsy format and more engaging format for all of you. And to help with that, we are getting sort of a brand new kind of podcast room where it's going to be designated for podcast interviews, and it's going to look in my view, a whole lot more professional than me just recording on my laptop over Zoom, of course. And so that podcast room is going to look real nice, should be up and running, hopefully, crossing my fingers, starting next month in February. And so that's going to look so nice. I'm so excited for it. And also, in terms of where this podcast is held, is mainly right now held on Spotify, of course, but eventually, very soon, is going to mainly move to SoundStack. That doesn't mean it might not be on Spotify, but the main platform that is going to be held on is SoundStack. So that is changing too, and that might also mean I can't produce certain podcasts in terms of releasing it every week, leading into that switch of SoundStack. Once we get on SoundStack, I can go ahead, but in terms of transitioning that, it might be some lull in actually putting out a podcast just because of the technical side of it. In terms of switching all the episodes over, is going to be better just to stay silent until we can officially get all the previous episodes on that app, and then we can really hit the ground running on there. But in terms of this episode, we have a very stacked one. We're going to talk about Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt and his alleged 3 options proposal to graduate high school. The notion of you either needing to join the military, go to college, or career tech in order to graduate. Of course, that elicited a lot of responses. We'll talk about that too. We'll talk about the organizational day at the Capitol, the new speaker, Dusty Devers, state senator out of Elgin, his Bitcoin bill he just filed, and also Cindy Munson, who is the minority leader in the House for the Democratic side, and some narratives I'm seeing formed on her X account. And then we'll briefly also talk about this internal fighting within the MAGA crowd over H-1B1 visas with the MAGA elites versus the ordinary MAGA voter. Again, I'm your host, 7 News political analyst Justin Allen Rose, and this is For the Record. Let's go ahead and get started with those Stitt comments. It all started with an interview that he gave with a media organization out of Oklahoma City. And it had to do with basically his Classrooms to Careers initiative. And within that interview, he had a quote that people took and really ran with it. And basically said he is basically proposing that you either have to graduate, in order to graduate high school, you either have to get accepted into college, career tech, or join the military. Here's a news story that 7 News reporter Cole Barbelow put together after these comments from Stitt really took off, both statewide and national-wide as well. But here's that news story that he did right now.
Oklahoma high schools. You've got to either be accepted to college, or you have to be accepted into a career tech, or you have to be going into the Army. You have to have some kind of plan post-graduation to go get a great job.
Many shared concern with the idea of students potentially only having the option of going into post-secondary education or into the military in order to receive their degree. However, in later statements, officials responded to the backlash, saying Stitt's comments were taken out of context. Abigail Cave, Director of Communications for the governor, took to X, saying, to clarify, Governor Stitt is not suggesting that we mandate military service. He wants to see that every kid graduating from high school has a plan, whether that be college, career tech, military service, or workforce. Don't believe everything you see on the internet, folks. As for the governor's post referenced in the interview, which led to the comment in question, the governor discusses what's already been done since he he took office. He lists a new financial literacy course, student work and career tech credits, new high school graduation requirements, and the parental choice tax credit as accomplishment highlights. When asked about the potential of requiring some sort of post-secondary plan, Daniel Pay, representative for Oklahoma House District 62, said, quote, "Such a mandate is difficult to envision in terms of implementation and constitutionality. I hope the governor will share more details in his State of the State address."
And so there's that quote. As you can hear, he had a kind of qualifier at the end of it or some kind of plan. And so that really protects him in terms of people pushing back against him. I wasn't basically he's saying, as we saw from Abigail Cave as well, it's basically saying, hey, no, that's not what I'm saying. These three proposals. It's just we want kids to have some sort of plan. But again, if I'm a political strategist and I'm on the opposite end of the aisle of Kevin Stitt, if I'm on the Democratic side instead of the Republican side, it doesn't matter if I believe, that quote was taken into context. It doesn't matter if I'm a political strategist. If I'm a political operator on the Democratic side here in Oklahoma, I'm taking those comments. I'm going to run with them to form a narrative to try to turn people against the Republican Party. That's what strategists are supposed to do. And if you're a Republican minority in another state, that's what you need to do. Take Democrats' quotes, try to turn them against them. That is basic political strategy. And so we had Cindy Munson here on X. Let me share my screen here. All right, so this is her X account. If you don't know, Representative Munson is originally from Lawton, and she now represents an Oklahoma City district on the Democratic side. And being the minority leader in the House isn't new to her. She's been in that position before. And so she has a very strong presence on that Oklahoma Democratic Party side. And her response to Stitt's comments on that interview, she says, quote, "Having flexibility and freedom means you choose what you do after graduating high school, not the government telling you that you only have three options. What about farmers, ranchers, business owners, and young entrepreneurs? Why should the government take those options away?" And further down on this thread on X, she says, "I'm the first person in my family to graduate from college, the daughter of a Vietnam veteran. I had the choice to go to college, and my dad chose to enlist in the United States Army." She continues, "Both excellent options to better our lives and our communities. But they were choices we made, not the government telling us what to do. GOP leaders, if you don't know what GOP stands for, it means Grand Old Party. It's just another, name for the Republican Party." She says GOP leaders are out of touch and want way too much control over our lives. So a very more populist approach to push back against this quote from Governor Kevin Stitt. Very populist, which I would say, if we look out through American history, the more populist messages tend to win. If you can paint the other side as the elites, out of touch, don't know true working class values or what the working class truly wants, then you have a good shot of winning. At least we can see. I'm reading a book now. It's a good book. I really am enjoying it. It kind of goes throughout the history of the Democratic Party and how they were able to win and why they lost in some eras of American history. And basically what I'm gleaning from this is that, hey, working class narratives are the way to victory. Not only for the Democratic Party, you have to do it for the Republican Party. I probably would say we saw it in this very last presidential election with Trump and Kamala Harris. We saw the more populist message really turn out, especially economic populist messages. And that's what I've been seeing a lot from Cindy Munson on her X account, is really working class messages. And it's going to be very interesting to see how her messaging really radiates going into this session, to see how the Democratic Party is able to push back against maybe the more far right policies that they believe is farther right, and see if they could get them not pass, or maybe they could get their own policies passed, or maybe they can even moderate some of the proposed legislation we're seeing from the Republican Party. Are they able to do that? But also, I know we're more than a year away from that 2026 gubernatorial race for Oklahoma's governor. But I mean, people already talk about 2028 in terms of who the Democrats are going to run for president. So it's never too early to talk about executive elections, even at the state level, for governor. And it's going to be interesting to see what sort of narratives are the Democrats going to form heading into that 2026 governor's race. Because we should see a very, very split. I I'm assuming here we're going to see a good split within the Republican Party heading into that governor primary in 2026. We're going to have, I'm assuming, I'm going to guess now, we might have Ryan Walters running in that primary versus AG Gittner Drummond. I'm thinking, and we're going to see Gittner Drummond being a little bit more moderate, and we're going to see Ryan Walters really take a far-right stance in his policies and his narratives. And so that could maybe slice the Republican Party a little bit. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Democrats are able to pick up on that and maybe turn it into their favor. That's going to be fun to watch. It's something I'm going to be watching out for. But of course, the Oklahoma legislature just had their organizational day at the Capitol, meaning they voted in those leadership positions and pretty much set the rules for the legislative session to come. And one proposal that was on the books it wasn't really discussed, but was on the books, it was filed, was this proposal by Tom Gann, Representative Tom Gann out of Enola. And he basically wanted to modernize, he says, I would say really revolutionize the power structure within the House. And basically, it all centered around the Speaker of the House position, because the Speaker of the House position in Oklahoma, just like almost any Speaker of the House positions, especially if we're talking about Congress, federal Congress, is a strong position, and that one of these strongest positions that you can have in a legislature here, especially here in America. And so he was saying, instead of having these grand powers really centralized into one figure in the House, why not break them up? Break them up into a committee, and even he says, let those freshman members, the people who are just getting in there for their first year, make them have some institutional power as well. He said this will promote transparency, reinvigorate the legislative process, amongst other ends. But it didn't pass. It didn't pass. Kyle Hilbert, his resolution passed in terms of how he wanted, and he's the new Speaker of the House, the youngest Speaker of the House in Oklahoma history. And so that was also interesting to see Tom Gann introduce this as the Oklahoma House was just left by the longest reigning Speaker of the House and now getting in the youngest Speaker of the House in history. Interesting that this proposal came forth in that sort of timeline. But it failed, and we have Kyle Hilbert, who is the youngest Speaker of the House in Oklahoma history, getting his resolution on the books and passed. And so that should be interesting to watch too, to see if we're going to get any more pushback against maybe the Speaker of the House powers, or how this sort of plays out as the legislative session goes on. And we do know, if you're wondering, Kyle Hilbert, what does he believe? What does he wants to see done in this legislative session, especially since he's the Speaker of the House? He has a lot of institutional powers to see bills get done that he wants to see get done in terms of, placing them in certain committees, putting them on the docket for hearings, and so forth. But he says he is really focusing on doing a balanced budget, which is the only thing constitutionally the legislature here in Oklahoma has to do every year. The only thing, if they only pass a balanced budget constitutionally, they did their jobs. That's the only thing constitutionally the legislature needs to do in Oklahoma. So he wants a balanced budget. He wants cell phone usage. He hopefully wants to see. Is that right? No. He's saying he hopefully is going to see a cell phone bill usage, or a cell phone usage bill introduced and passed this session. Basically, he wants less cell phone usage in public schools here in Oklahoma. So he wants to see that, and he also wants to address certain workforce shortages within the state. We'll see if he gets those wishes. We'll see if the Republican body within that House produces those legislation, or maybe the Senate side will produce it, and eventually it will make its way over to the House. We shall see on that. Of course, I mentioned in the intro, we're also going to talk about State Senator Dusty Deavers and his Bitcoin bill, which I find very interesting because a lot of the language surrounding Bitcoin, and I would say I'm a Bitcoin expert by any means, but I know of Bitcoin. I know of it. I have been exposed to it in terms of I bought Bitcoin in the past. I bought other cryptocurrencies in the past, Cardano, Ethereum, that sort of thing. So I have some experience with it, and I can understand, how the price is going up and down. And I studied it a little bit, and so I know a little bit to it. And so Devers introduced a Bitcoin Freedom Act to bring Oklahoma's economy, he says, into the future. Basically, this bill, if passed, would allow Oklahoma employees to opt to receive payment in Bitcoin. So no longer are you getting opt to receive payment in Bitcoin, not getting dollars, US dollars, you're getting paid in Bitcoin, and enable vendors to accept Bitcoin payments in Oklahoma. So not only you can receive payment in Bitcoin, but you can also use Bitcoin when you're trying to buy something from a vendor. He says here, quote, in a time when inflation is eroding the purchasing power of hardworking Oklahomans, Bitcoin provides a unique opportunity to protect earnings and investments. As Bitcoin continues to rise and the value of the dollar continues to be printed away in Washington, D.C., Oklahoma must act to protect our people. And I see it on X a lot. I follow a lot of Bitcoin people just to see the narratives that they're producing as well. And it's because it's very political. A lot of their arguments are really based in the political world in terms of their narratives. And a lot of it is it really mirrors a lot of conservative narratives in terms of freedom. You know, the American way of life, of being able to do anything you want, not being able to be held down by the government sort of way of thinking. And Bitcoin isn't backed by government. It's not backed by gold, silver, anything like that. Military from a country, nothing. It's just there. It's pretty much backed by the confidence of those who buy it and the confidence of other people outside looking into Bitcoin as well. And so whether or not this would shield people from losing the purchasing power, I don't know. We don't truly know. We don't have a crystal ball. We know that Bitcoin has gone and seen immense heights. It has reached over 100,000, I believe, back in December. But since then, it has lessened. I believe I did a TikTok yesterday. If you don't know, I'm on TikTok now, J.A. Rose Reports. Look me up on TikTok. And I did a quick TikTok about this Bitcoin bill that Devers just filed for this next session in the Oklahoma legislature. And basically, I looked, and within a day, it has decreased its monetary value. One Bitcoin decreased by 6%. So to me, if you have Bitcoin, one day it's worth this much, next day it's worth 6% less. You lost some of your purchasing power within that day. Now, does that mean that Bitcoin won't stabilize a little bit into the future? No, it doesn't. Again, we don't know what truly the future holds. And so maybe allowing employees to opt in, maybe Devers thinks is a good thing, even though, Bitcoin tends to fluctuate really, day in and day out. I remember one time when I was really paying attention to the Bitcoin price, it went from 60,000 one second it seemed and down to 30,000 the next second. Half of its value lost, it seemed, within a second. If my bank account, I know Bitcoin isn't, stashed in banks, established, what have you. But let's just play that scenario. You have Bitcoin and then you lose it, and you have a lot of Bitcoin in your account, let's say, and then within 10 minutes, 50% of your purchasing power is gone. I don't know how people would feel about that. I don't know how well a lot of Oklahomans really pay attention to Bitcoin. Again, it's going to be interesting to see how this really plays out. If you are a person who wants the government to have less power over monetary policy, then you want this to pass. If you think Bitcoin is volatile, too up and down in terms of its price to really be too stable for a currency, and you believe it might induce more criminal activity because it's a little bit less likely to be traced, then you probably don't want this to pass. I don't know. But it's going to be interesting to see what it does this legislative session. Because again, it's really baked into those narratives surrounding Bitcoin's freedom, not being able to be tracked. It really tracks with the Republican narratives that we have been seeing in these past sessions, or this past couple of years in terms of the political world. So it's going to be interesting. Like I mentioned, Dusty Devers did not get one of his bills passed last session. So I wonder if he's going to have a different approach this session. And he also has a little bit more statutory authority now within the legislature, because he's been in there. He has a little bit of seniority now. Again, his first session was last session, so it's not a lot of seniority, but still, he's on committees. He knows the landscape a little bit better, and I'm sure, has made friends, and he has made friends. He's a part of the Oklahoma Freedom Caucus, one of the co-chairs, the co-chair in the Senate. So he has friends. He has some people around him that might be able to have a little bit more weight in terms of the power within the Senate and maybe even the House as well. So it's going to be interesting to see, will Dusty Deaver's bills see a lot more ground gained this session than he saw in the last session? That is another thing that I'm going to be keeping a close eye on. It's not only Dusty Deavers, but that Oklahoma Freedom Caucus. How much power are they going to be able to induce into this session? It's going to be a fun one to watch. But lastly, we'll talk about H-1B1 visas real quick. Not too much into the nitty-gritty policy part of it, but just the fight we saw really take hold on X. I mean, we saw, of course, Elon Musk, what I consider to be the MAGA elites. We have the Elon Musk, the Vivek Ramaswamis. And to an extent, I would even put Donald Trump, President-elect Donald Trump, into the MAGA elites because they have a little bit more money and they have the political power now. The opposite end of the spectrum would be the MAGA voter, the people who are on the ground, the people within the base of the MAGA movement. And we saw a very strong fight over this H-1B1 visas. The MAGA elites were in support of it. I would say the majority, at least what I saw on X, of the MAGA voters were against it. If you don't know, basically the MAGA elites are saying the H-1B1 visas allows them to get the best and the brightest from other countries into those tech jobs here in America. The MAGA voter, on the other hand, you kind of had two kind of groups within that MAGA voter base who basically said, we had one base basically saying we just don't want immigrants to come here, and we had the other base saying that wasn't saying, we don't want immigrants. They're saying, well, these H-1B1 visas allows these companies to hire the quote unquote best and the brightest immigrants at a lesser salary than they would American workers. And so they were saying we don't want the H-1B1 visas because it lessens the power of the ordinary American worker who wants to work in that sort of field. They are saying they should hire American workers first and then those immigrant workers next. It was interesting just because we saw a lot of lashing out between Musk and his ex-post and also Vivek Ramaswamy basically really butted heads against what is known as American culture. I mean, he really railed against what he sees as American culture, talking about how a culture that, puts Zach Morris on a pedestal and Screech, down in the mud would never produce the best and the brightest in terms of engineers. Which, of course, I mean, you probably heard a lot of takes regarding Vivek's take, and without getting too much into it, it did not go over well, especially with the ordinary MAGA voter, of course, because they hold American culture close to their hearts. And everything regarding that, and so it was really interesting. And while it has died down since it originally got going, the fight between the MAGA elites and the MAGA voters, I don't think it's gone away. We're going to continue seeing this sort of battle between the MAGA voter and the MAGA elites. I would say all throughout this Trump presidency, we probably will see it, especially if Elon Musk continues to be a very strong force in the next Trump administration. But again, no one has a crystal ball and no one knows for sure. So when you're analyzing, you also have to take that to heart that while you're assuming, and of course I would say educated guessing, educating assuming maybe, but it's going to be fun to watch nonetheless to see these next 4 years play out in terms of the political games that are going to be played, both statewide and nationally. But if you have anything you uncovered, talked about on this podcast, reach out to me. Tag me on Facebook. Tag me on X. Tag me on TikTok. Can you do that? Could you tag on TikTok? I'm new. I don't know. But check me out on TikTok, J.A. Rose Reports. And until next time, I'm 7 News political analyst Justin Allen Rose, and this has been For the Record.